"Look, girl, I've got $100 if you show me your," he said to me, and everything else fell numb to my hearing. The entire Mardi Gras festival, which had been one big escape for me from the drag of my desk job, suddenly stopped being fun. I watched the colors up close, but it all seemed like a shade of gray, dull and unimpressive, just like the smiles and the partying. I didn't want to show a man I didn't know my body. He had a curious face. His head was so bald it was shiny, but he maintained a full blonde beard with a mustache so long it covered his mouth. His eyes were brown, and his dilated pupils, in contrast with the rest of his whites, made him look a darker shade. "No, you creepy ass," I blurted, turned around, and muttered a cuss word under my breath as I continued to scan the crowd for my friends. I looked this way and that, and up the crowd, and just there I saw a familiar hat. I drifted in that direction through the jungle of partying bodies that had become sticky with sweat. I had dismissed him in my head, and for all intent, I had imagined he was gone when I walked away from him, like many of the other creeps at the festival. Slipping through the bodies that moved like an animated maze soon tired me out, and I turned my direction instead towards the sidewalk. I climbed the sidewalk and marched briskly towards the hat. From where I stood to where I wanted to go, exactly where I had left my friends, there was an alley. I had no idea about this until I felt such strong hands come from behind to seize my arm, forcing me into the corner. I was stunned when I turned around, and there he was, the creepy stranger with the shiny bald head and blonde mustache. He pulled me so forcefully that I could not speak through the silence that was my confusion. The crowd around us turned their attention to us, and before I could speak, he spoke first to their inquiring gaze. "She stole something from me. Can you believe this shit?" he muttered, and the crowd suddenly backed away. If I was not immediately scared to my pants of this stranger's overwhelming bulk of size and the danger he posed, I, too, would be impressed by how expertly he manipulated the entire situation. I moaned in protest, but the crowd shrugged me away and continued with their march. "Now listen here," he said, grinding his teeth. He recoiled his hips and pressed a knife to the side of my abdomen where the crowd could not see. "You will smile at the passing carnival and stroke me off until I get my release. If I like it, I won't tear your belly open." My head spun. It was as though I were an onlooker in my own violation. But in that moment, it was not that which worried me. It was the horror of his knife in my stomach, tearing my stomach open while I bleed to death. The possibility of him mingling with the large crowd and escape was not beyond thinking. Fear crippled me, and I whimpered an apology to him, asking him to not hurt me. He pressed his knife a little into my flesh, and I looked. I quivered like a leaf on a breezy evening, flowing with a rash gust that I could neither contain nor understand. The knife was sharp, deadly steel, and the menace in this stranger's eyes betrayed a willingness to use it on me. It was all the warning I needed. Tears veiled my eyes. My body yearned for salvation as day turned to bleak night in the pool of my teary eyes. I was terrified for my life, and it caused my chest to open up. I could scarcely breathe. The numbness of all my senses peaked. I struggled to keep myself standing, up on my feet even as my knees buckled. The sensations in my head manifested into the outer world, and I saw the world itself spinning, round and around the core of my terror. "I've killed people for less disrespect," he said as he pressed the knife even further. My lips parted, and before I could speak, he proved it by jabbing his knife into my flesh, puncturing me to reveal a thin, bloodied stream that ran down his blade. I gasped in the shock of watching myself bleed. "You make any loud noise and I make the wound bigger. Do as I tell you and I might let you live," he whispered to me, pressing me against the wall. "These light won't even notice your dead body until the cops come for it. You'd be just another accident." I reached my hands to grab him slowly to rub on his member, just as he had asked me to. My stomach roiled with revulsion, and every second that I was there, held against my will with the tip of a knife pressed into the side of my stomach while the Mardi Gras festival went on by, felt like hellish torture. My body struggled to absorb it. I felt warm from within, my body burning up with dread-induced fever. It did not offend my senses that I was being violated in the open as much as the thought that other festival goers were passing by without stopping because those before them had not stopped. One of the best weeks of my life had quickly dipped into a nightmare. The tears in my eyes beaded and streaked down my face as I choked on my scream for help, knowing that meant being stabbed. Thoughts raced through my mind at a mind-bending pace. "Bring it out and stroke it," he commanded me. I obeyed him, and my world froze. I did not see David through the film of tears in my hat. Not even his fancy beads and his hat slipped into my consciousness as I was totally detached from the horrifying experience with the stranger. All I saw was a heavy fist flying at the speed of light, whooshing past my face and landing on the side of the stranger's ears. The collision of David's fist and the stranger's skull sounded like an explosion had just gone off. The stranger's body was flat out on the ground. "Becca, did he hurt you?" David asked, managing his attention between me and the stranger. The marching stopped, and a crowd from the festival stopped to see what was happening. I whispered what had happened to Dave through tears, and he pulled me in for a hug, assuring me I was safe from the terrifying episode. In a matter of minutes, the cops arrived, even though I had no clarity of mind to know when they had been called. My testimony was taken, and the stranger was placed under arrest. Then I went home, promising myself that it will take a lot to get me to go for another Mardi Gras.
I worked at Costco for about a year and a half when this all happened. My mom is an avid Costco shopper, so she knew the manager pretty well. After some schmoozing, she was able to help me land a part-time job in the food court so I could start saving for college. It was a pretty easy gig. Most of the food comes pre-prepared, so it's just a matter of putting it in the oven and taking it out at the right time. Some things require a little work, like the smoothies and ice cream, but they aren't complicated. You do some measuring and pour the ingredients into the machine. That's it. I learned the ropes pretty fast, and I enjoyed the work. It gave me something to do after school, and I got some extra spending money. After about a year, they asked me if I would be interested in training people. They promised I would earn a small bonus for each person I trained. With the extra cash to motivate me, I agreed. I trained one person before Brian. Her name was Marcia, and she was in her 50s. She wanted to bring in some extra money to help her husband pay the bills. I thoroughly enjoyed training her. Not only was she a joy to be around, but she got the tasks down pretty fast. Honestly, training Marcia was such a breeze, I thought I must be great at training. My outlook changed when I met Brian. Brian was about my age. His face was covered in acne, and he wore thick spectacles that made his eyes appear much larger than they were. It was easy to tell he was uncomfortable in his own skin. Being the same age, a teenager, I get it. I had insecurities, but I was fortunate that they didn't hinder my ability to socialize like Brian. I picked up a weird vibe from him, but I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I told myself, he's probably just shy. Give him a chance. As I trained him, the vibe I felt grew stronger and stronger with each shift. To start, he was a pain in the ass to train. It was like every night he would go home, put his mind through a rinse cycle, and forget everything I showed him. Because of this, I would start each training session by recapping what we did the prior shift. Brian also asked the weirdest questions. His questions never really pertained to the work we did. He would ask things like if I ever added stuff to the recipes. His exact words were, "Have you ever tried putting your own twist on the pizza?" I asked him, "What do you mean? Like, add jalapenos?" Marcia and I sometimes do that when we close and split it. "Not really," he responded. "Do you ever bring your own stuff from home to add to the food?" No." I used what we have on hand. I think that would be a major violation of policy to do something like that, so maybe don't. He shrugged, and I continued to show him how to cook pizza. There were other weird things, like customers almost always had an issue with him. We had to permanently put him on food prep because he made people so mad or uncomfortable. I overheard conversations he had with a customer, and he would ask really personal, inappropriate questions. One time, I heard him ask a woman if she trusted her husband or if she ever thought he would cheat on her. I had to narc on him for that. Our manager talked to him, but after Marcia heard him telling people how to navigate the dark web, we banned him to the kitchen. Marcia claimed she once saw him watching a snuff film on his phone on a break. She said, he wasn't even trying to hide it. He was sitting out there in the food court, watching a guy cut someone's head off. He was giggling. She told me she planned to keep her distance after that. I trust she knew what she saw because Marcia wasn't a gossip. She seemed very disturbed by him after that incident. Problems began to arise when more and more customers started complaining about being sick after eating our food. Usually, it was the churros and pizza that gave people food poisoning. We cracked down on everything. We cleaned better, checked dates on everything, and essentially improved and sharpened all of our practices. But the problem persisted. It got so bad they shut down the food court for a couple days and had a couple health inspectors come to investigate. They couldn't figure out what was happening either. They reopened the food court and people continued complaining about food poisoning. Management looked at all the complaints and realized the only customers getting sick were those who came at night. The only people who worked at night were Marcia, Brian, our night supervisor, and me. All of us said we had no idea what was happening. Marcia pulled me aside one night and told me she wondered if the problem was Brian. It was hard to discern whether it was our distaste for him or if he could actually be poisoning the food. Once she brought this up to me, I said, just because someone is a little off doesn't mean they would do something as extreme as poison people's food, right? Marcia shook her head and reminded me she saw him watching a snuff film. She went on to say, ever since then, I've kept my distance. Only disturbed people watch stuff like that. I couldn't deny she had a point. Someone once explained to me a gore porn they saw, and the description alone was enough for it to haunt me for a week. I still wanted to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. I didn't think I could come across someone that evil. That changed when I walked into the kitchen and saw Brian holding a quart-sized plastic bag filled with what looked like a white powder. He was dumping his white dust into the smoothie mixture. "What are you doing?" I asked immediately upon seeing him. "Oh shit," he said. I caught him off guard and he stumbled down the ladder he was standing on. "What is that?" At first, I thought it was cocaine or rat poisoning or some kind of substance. I wish I were right. I walked up to him and ripped the bag out of his hand. "Is this glass?" My temper rose. He mumbled something I couldn't make out. Brian was flustered being caught in the act. He struggled to get out. "I can explain. Just let me explain. Don't tell anyone." "Don't tell anyone you're putting glass shards into the smoothie mix? Are you insane?" His face turned bright red, trying to think of something to say. He panicked and ran out of the kitchen. I went to my supervisor and told him what I saw. I asked my supervisor what we should do, and he told me they would fire Brian immediately. I asked, but what's stopping him from getting a job somewhere else and doing this? Since we caught him before he harmed someone, our hands are tied. We cleaned out the smoothie machine, but to be safe, we didn't sell any smoothies that night. Unfortunately, we did sell one ice cream. The customer took one lick, and their tongue was set ablaze by microscopic cuts. Blood gushed from their mouth, and they had to be rushed to the emergency room. I know the customer ended up being okay, but I couldn't help wondering how they fixed that. The customer's tongue had the smallest shards of glass stuck in their tongue. I doubt the shards were very visible to the human eye. Because someone was harmed, we were able to report Brian to the police. When the authorities searched his bedroom, they found a journal that recorded everything he did to the food. He used everything from laxatives to rat poisoning to his own urine and feces to tamper with the food. When they told us, I threw up. I probably ate some of the food Brian mixed with his poop. Marsha looked at me and said, "I told you." We closed the food court down and deep cleaned it. We knew the problem was Brian, but we still felt like a deep clean was necessary, just in case. As far as I know, Brian is sitting in a juvenile detention center somewhere. I just hope they keep him there for a long, long time. Since middle school, my two best friends and I have dreamed of celebrating Mardi Gras in New Orleans. My friend's aunt used to tell us stories of her wild Mardi Gras adventures. One year, she fell in love. Another night, she and her friends ended their night running from the cops after they snuck into a supposed haunted theater. She made us want to experience the chaos for ourselves. My two friends are older than me, so we decided my 21st birthday was the perfect occasion for our real Mardi Gras. My friend's aunt warned us that we may be too young, but we reminded her that she had partied when she was younger than we were. She made us promise we wouldn't flash anyone for beads, a promise none of us kept. Fat Tuesday came, and we all planned to skip class Monday through Wednesday. We wanted to do this right. We drove down Monday and spent the day on Tuesday doing the tourist thing. We all wanted to ensure we looked good, so we gave ourselves plenty of time to get ready. I wore my black tube dress. Guys flocked to me whenever I wore that dress to frat parties, and I wanted to get as many quick drinks as possible. I didn't go crazy with makeup because I didn't want it to be a smeared mess by the end of the night. I don't want to sound full of it, but I look good. My friends looked just as hot. One wore a mini pink halter dress and the other a fitted red pleather tube dress. We looked at ourselves in the mirror and Julie chirped, "We're going to get so many beads and free drinks." We all laughed and headed out to the first bar. On our way to the bar, the streets were already pandemonium. Amidst the chaos, an old woman grabbed me and said, "Beware of the man in the mask." I shook her off and continued on my way. "What was that about?" Julie asked. "I don't know, just some lady probably already drunk off her ass," I joked. At the first bar, we ordered a round of shots and each ordered a cocktail. I assessed the room. Not many guys stood out, but that didn't mean I couldn't snag a free drink. Sure enough, I caught the eye of one guy and gave him a small smile. About 10 minutes later, our waiter brought each of us another drink. I looked back at the guy and he raised his glass to me. Behind him stood a stiff person in a white Mardi Gras mask and a black cloak. Kind of weird, but anything goes on Fat Tuesday. It looked like the person was staring directly at me, but there was no way to tell in their mask. They gave me a sick feeling. My stomach churned as I continued looking at them. "Hey, you good?" Steph cut in, snapping me out of my trance. "Oh yeah, just all the masks kind of freak me out." I smiled and shrugged it off. At the next bar, we ordered the cheapest drink we could and waited for the free drinks to come. Another group of ladies ordered us a couple rounds of shots when we told them it was my birthday. We were laughing and having a good time with them when I saw the masked person again. They stood off in a corner, still stiff as a board, looking in my direction. I sipped my drink and smiled at the person to see if they would react. They didn't. They continued their stoic stance. I nudged my friend Kim and tried to point the person out to her. As I directed her attention to that corner, the masked stranger was gone. I told myself it must be someone else. After all, more than one person was wearing a mask like that. The group of women that bought us shots invited us to the next bar they were going to. Of course, we couldn't say no. This is exactly what we hoped would happen. The third bar felt like the epitome of Mardi Gras. The lights flashed purple, yellow, and green. Beads hung from the ceiling and the railings, and the light fixtures had feather boas hanging from them. People were dancing, laughing, and drinking. At one point, my friends told the waiter it was my birthday, and the entire corner of the bar started singing happy birthday to me. We took to the dance floor, where I became entwined with a tall, dark stranger. He had soft brown eyes and a thick head of hair. I felt like we were pulled together, drawn to one another, even though all that happened was we were pushed into each other by the other dancers. Without saying a word, We fell into the same rhythm. I grinded on him until he whispered in my ear, "What's your name?" "Sandra," I told him. "What's your name?" "Jake." It didn't take long before we started making out on the dance floor. He led me to a corner with couches and pulled me onto his lap so we could continue. I had no idea how long we were there when my friends came over to break it up. I was annoyed, but I knew they were looking out for me. We promised not to split up because it's not safe to be a woman. Jake was unfazed. He offered to get us all drinks and left for the bar. "He's cute," Kim said. "Yeah, we were really enjoying each other until you two came up." The two of them laughed. Julie chimed in. "We lost sight of you and got scared you were taken." "Nope, just making out with a stranger on the couch." Jake returned and gave me a wink as he handed me my drink. I introduced him to my friends, and they hit it off immediately. Jake was quite the charmer. My friends adored him and soon left us so we could be alone again. "Cool friends," he said. I smiled and ran my fingers through his hair. My head started to feel heavy, and it became hard to breathe. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked. "Probably just need some water." "I'll go grab you some." I don't remember him coming back with water. Not long after he left to grab it, the room blurred until it went black. I had a fuzzy memory of someone carrying me out of the club and getting stopped by the bouncer. She got a little ahead of herself. I'm taking her back to the hotel. Whoever was carrying me yelled over the music. I remember the bouncer looking at me and then looking at him. I tried to say something, but my mouth felt numb. The bouncer let us go. Then it went black again. I woke up in the back of a van. There were two other girls with me, both passed out. I tried kicking them to wake them up, but neither budged. I looked around. I saw the white mask and a heap of black fabric in the corner. I looked to the front of the van and into the rearview mirror and saw Jake's brown eyes. Another man sat in the passenger seat. They were focused on the road. It seemed like we were going pretty fast by the feel of it. I needed to act. Who knew what their destination was, but I knew it wouldn't be good for me. I needed to stop this van. I grabbed the cloak and rolled it up so it would be like a rope. Quietly, I crept to the front of the van. I climbed over the seats until I was behind the driver's seat. I wrapped the cloak around Jake's neck and held him against the headrest. He started grabbing at it to try and loosen it to get air, but I held it tight. His partner went to grab me, but I fended him off by kicking him. Jake released the steering wheel to pry the cloak away from his neck, and his partner took the wheel. We swerved into the next lane and collided head-on with a small sedan. A couple other cars couldn't stop in time, so it ended up being a 5-car pileup. I released Jake, unlocked the door, and got out of there. I went to check on the person in the sedan. They were okay, but needed to go to the hospital. I used their phone to call 911. When I looked back at the van, the two men were gone. I checked the bank, and the two girls were still there. I'm relieved I saved myself and them. None of us had to meet whatever dreadful fate awaited for us. I got back in contact with my friends who were worried sick. After Jake dragged me out of the club, they spent the rest of the night trying to track me down. They talked to the bartender, to the bouncer, to people on the street until they ended up going straight to the police. I was stupid to accept that drink, and I'm lucky I can tell the tale.
I've been shopping at my local Costco since I was a child. It was one of the only places my father ever took me to. The beautiful man, my father, was the only family I ever knew. He liked to shop often and said it was the way that he had gotten my mother when he had nothing because, well, at least he could afford her stuff from there whenever he could. When I was 21, my father had died in his sleep from a broken heart that yearned for my mother, and I was left all alone. Grief stripped me off everything except Costco. I could work 40 hours a week for cheap, but one gets a sense that money was not the only reason that people would shop at Costco. Every piece of clothing that passed my neck was from the local Costco. It was the timeline of the decade. The Costco was the only thing of permanence that remained in my life. But it became familiar. I knew my way around every row, and I was convinced that I could march through the aisles with my eyes closed, and it was what was happening for the most part, as I was too dizzy to observe my surroundings. In the usual way that I would shop at Costco, I had gone on that strange evening when everything would change for me in a matter of suddenness that I struggled to process with. I remember I had a gray top on, and it was what I had on that drew the stranger to me. The inscription on the shirt had been simple but rebellious. It was an 80s hip-hop band called NWA. The tag read, "F the Police." I didn't think too much about it since I had plenty of other shirts like it in my closet, and I didn't really know that much about rap. I was picking up some blouses from the rack when someone came up behind me and seized me by the wrist. His hands were firm and calloused, witnessing the fact that he was someone used to laboring at some hard activity. As hard as his palm was, it was cold. It was that which caused me to flinch, but his hands did not let go, wrapped around my wrist like a wrench. "Annette," he called me in a strange East European accent, as my eyes drifted to his face. He was a young man, cleanly shaven and a neatly pressed shirt tucked in. He had a handsome face, the type that could fulfill a teenager's wild fantasy. But suddenly I pulled my hands from his wrist and he yielded. "You have the wrong person, sir," I said to him in a calm tone as I could say. Almost as soon as I said those words, I saw his face transform through emotions from light to heavy brooding that made his brows fall askew. I couldn't have known what he thought in contemplation, and his foreign features provided no clue. I chalked it up to mere confusion, but even those who were confused at approaching a stranger, I thought that maybe it was someone that he knew and showed remorse quickly and apologized for the error. It could have been dismissed as some light humor, as everyone makes mistakes, but this man that was in front of me had an unwavering presence. "Annette," he called me again, and now I knew something strange was happening. I took a step back. He was at least 6'5", with muscular arms that could seize me without much resistance. I had an already feeling sweep over me, and the charm or whatever aura that he had over me that made me feel relaxed wore off. I was now wary, but I did not show my panic. "Excuse me?" I looked around the aisle when I was to discover that I was alone. "Anybody there?" He furrowed his brows and placed a solitary finger on his lips to silence me. He hissed through his fingers, and I obeyed unwittingly. My rapidly beating heart paralyzed my body. Sheer terror that I could not process ravaged my senses. I couldn't move, even if I wanted to run. As far as my legs could carry me away from the menacing glower I was confronted with, I was fixed to my spot as he made his move towards me and placed his hand on my shoulder. "You will come with me, and your name is Annette when you try to pay, or I will bash your head against the floor so hard you will be unrecognizable, for when the coroner finds you," he said to me. His accent cleared up. "I know you're alone." It felt like a nightmare from that moment. It felt like a nightmare, a blur, worsening, and I almost fainted. But it was happening, and I was no fool to think otherwise. I was being kidnapped to be trafficked. I couldn't feel my legs. I was so terrified of the many things that could go wrong in my life. How I didn't think that this was a possibility. No wonder his hands were so cold and hard. My body quivered on its own, and my stomach rumbled loudly. "I'll pay," he said, as we made our way to the counter. I watched my hope evaporate with every step that led me into this horrifying maze. A nightmare. The voices in my head echoed loudly. I had the thought of resisting, but I knew that it would come with great bodily harm. He knew I was alone. I was so shaken by the entire episode and my incapacity to process what was happening. I didn't even realize that it drew the attention of one of the reps at the Costco counter. "Did I give the items you wanted to you, Claire?" I heard a beautiful woman say, and the words thumped into my hearing without distinction. I looked behind me to see if she was talking to someone else. My name isn't Claire, I thought in my head, but when I looked back, our eyes met. Come, come, she said, and just as she did, she pulled me to her, and the strange man held my hands. She smiled at him. Sorry, she ordered some stuff recently, and I wanted to hand it to her. To avoid the scene, he released my hands, and in a second I heard a yelling from across the stall. Get down on the ground! 2 cops had materialized out of thin air, ordering him to stand down. When he resisted, they shot him with a tase gun. I turned to the rep that helped me away from him. My heart was still whipping wild in my chest. They grabbed the man from the ground when he tried to resist, and they cuffed him before taking him away. Damn these traffickers. I knew he was dangerous the moment I saw him coming in, and I saw him watching you. The rep said to me, "Hey, be safe out there."
My sister Nancy won a free trip for 2 to New Orleans for Mardi Gras. It was some kind of call-in competition on the radio where she had to answer sports trivia or something. It included VIP passes to a couple parties and a 3-night stay at one of the oldest hotels in the French Quarter. She was planning to go with her boyfriend Ben, but she had broken up with him just before the trip. So, she called me and asked if I wanted to go. I had a lot of work to do, but I couldn't pass up this kind of opportunity. I'd always wanted to see New Orleans, so I rescheduled things at my job and joined Nancy on the trip. When we got there, the festivities were in full swing. We checked into the hotel and then started exploring the area. Guys were constantly offering us drinks and asking if we wanted to earn some beads. Nancy said yes to everything, but I was a little less confident. I guess my sister wanted to go crazy during the trip, especially after her breakup. I'd never seen her act so wild before. In the afternoon, there was a huge parade running through the streets. It passed right in front of our hotel. There were dancers and floats and people everywhere. It was total chaos, but it was also really fun. Then one particularly strange float passed by. Unlike all the others, it didn't have many decorations. It also wasn't colorful. The whole thing was a black and gray platform with 6 jazz musicians on it. They all had different instruments, and they were all wearing black. I don't know why that particular float creeped me out, but it seemed really out of place. As it passed us, the man playing the saxophone set his instrument down and started gesturing toward Nancy. He wanted her to join him on the top of the float. Nancy tried to shake her head no, but the man seemed pretty insistent. Nancy looked at me and said, "Why not?" Then she walked closer and the man pulled her up onto the float. The other musicians continued playing and Nancy started to dance. At the time, it seemed like a fun little moment, even though the float seemed a little weird. But then, the float got farther down the street and Nancy tried to jump off. All the musicians stopped her from leaving. They were a bit far away, so I couldn't hear what she said, but it looked like she was telling them that she wanted to get off. The saxophone player again set down his instrument and held her in place. By then, the float turned onto another street and I lost track of them. I was all alone, even though I was surrounded by a crowd of people. I didn't know what to do. I knew that my sister could take care of herself, but I still had a very weird feeling. I pushed my way through the crowd and tried to get onto the street where the float had turned. But it took a while, and by the time I crossed through the other floats, they were gone. I tried to tell myself that everything was going to be okay. Mardi Gras was a big, crazy celebration, and you just have to go with the flow. So I went to a nearby cafe, which was a bit quieter than the street, and I tried to call my sister. She didn't answer. I texted her, but she still didn't answer. I didn't want to be out there by myself, so I decided to go back to the hotel room and wait for Nancy to get back. She never did. The party continued on the street for the rest of the day and into the night, and Nancy still hadn't returned. I texted her a bunch of times, but I still didn't get any response. By the middle of the night, I was really worried. I called my mom to ask her what to do, but she told me I was overreacting. Then I called 2 of Nancy's friends and got the same answer. I opened up my Instagram to try to find any other friends that I thought could give me some advice. That's when I noticed that Ben, her ex-boyfriend, had posted photos from the same parade. He was in New Orleans too. I knew that their big breakup had been pretty messy, so maybe he had something to do with her kidnapping. After all, why would he come all this way and not tell us about it? So I messaged him, asking where he was. I didn't want to talk to him directly because I was afraid of what I'd say. I also didn't want to accuse him outright. If he did have something to do with the kidnapping, it was best to get as much information out of him without making him angry. He texted me back right away, admitting that he'd come all this way to surprise my sister. She definitely looked surprised, I responded. He said he didn't understand. He hadn't seen her yet. I couldn't tell if he was lying. Why would he be honest about being here and then not tell me the truth about taking Nancy? And why would he even post photos from the parade at all? None of this made sense. I was about to text him again when he called me. He asked if he could speak to Nancy, and I told him that she wasn't with me. "What?" he said. He sounded so surprised that I knew for sure he had nothing to do with her kidnapping. I figured I'd tell him the truth, so I explained what happened with that strange float at the parade. He asked me if the jazz musicians on the float were all wearing black, and I said yes. Then his voice got really panicked, and he said that he'd read about a group of local kidnappers who all wear black and steal women away in the middle of big celebrations. He said that he didn't believe the stories, but it definitely sounded like Nancy was the group's latest victim. He told me that he knew exactly where the group was gathered. I demanded that he give me the location so I could call the police, and he told me no. He said that these men were way too dangerous to get the police involved. He said we'd have to pay them off ourselves. He gave me an address and told me to meet him there in 30 minutes. He said he'd bring the money to pay them off, but he didn't say how much. After he hung up the phone, I honestly didn't know what to do. Deep down, I believed he was telling me the truth and really wanted to help Nancy, but I wasn't 100% sure. I also didn't know if I could trust him to deal with such a serious situation. Ben was always kind of a goofball. That was one of the reasons why they broke up. Still, I didn't have a choice. I waited about 15 minutes and then headed out of the hotel to go to the address he'd given me. I ended up at a really old ornate cemetery within walking distance from the hotel. It was completely empty, but I was close enough to the main streets to still hear people partying in the distance. "Hello?" I called out. "Ben? Nancy?" No one answered. I walked among the giant tombstones and elevated graves. I'd never been more scared in my life. I really regretted not telling anyone else where I was going. And then, in the distance, I heard jazz music. The sounds were slowly getting louder, and I realized it was the same group of black-wearing musicians that had pulled Nancy onto their float. They were playing their instruments and walking between the graves. They walked right toward me. I thought about running, but then I'd never get any answers about what happened to my sister. So I just stood there, trying to look as confident as possible, and waited for them to approach. Finally, they stopped right in front of me, still playing their music, and the saxophone player tossed 2 small objects at my feet. They all turned to me and walked back into the distance, their music fading away. I looked down at the ground and almost threw up. Right at my feet was the necklace that Nancy had been wearing. Right next to it was a single slip of paper with the message, "He didn't bring enough money." I never saw my sister or her boyfriend ever again.
The first time the roses appeared, I was just about to leave for work. I was running a little late, so I practically tripped out of my apartment and slammed the door, almost trampling on the beautiful bouquet of flowers sitting on the mat behind me. I blinked in surprise at the mysterious gift, glancing down the hall as if expecting to see someone waiting for me, but I was alone. Crouching down, I picked up the roses and searched for a tag or note, but there was nothing. Whoever had left them there clearly wanted to remain anonymous. The flowers were sweet and fragrant, at least a dozen of them with blood-red petals and leafy stems. Knowing I would be late for work regardless, I unlocked my apartment and headed back inside to put them in water. If only I knew who they were from. The second time the roses appeared, dusk was already falling outside. I was lounging in my apartment after a long day of work when I heard someone knocking on the door. It was more like scratching, like fingertips scraping against wood, so I peered through the peephole first. At the very edge of the corridor, I glimpsed a shadow disappear around the corner. A flicker of movement and then stillness. With a frown, I unlatched the chain and opened the door, stepping out. The corridor was empty, but another bouquet of roses were sitting on the mat. It was only a couple of days since the last one. I knew Valentine's Day was right around the corner, but I wasn't seeing anyone, and I had no idea who could be leaving these roses for me. I was simultaneously pleased and unnerved by their appearance, especially after seeing that mysterious shadow. Someone clearly didn't want me to see them. But why? Shaking the thoughts away, I reached down for the roses, wincing when I pricked my finger on a thorn. Blood immediately welled, staining part of the stem red. Great, I muttered under my breath, trying not to focus on the soft sting in my finger. Well, at least the thorn hadn't gotten stuck in my flesh. That would have been painful. Throwing one last glance down the hall, I hurried back into my apartment and locked the door, careful not to touch any more thorns. These roses smelled less fresh than the last ones, with some of the petals already wiltering, but they still smelled sweet. I put them in the same vase as the others after cutting some of the stems, setting them on the cupboard in my open sitting dining area. They at least added a splash of color to the otherwise drab-looking apartment. Still, not knowing who they were from bothered me. I wish they'd at least left a note. A week before Valentine's Day, I got my third bouquet. I was at work when one of the office administrators, Mary, came over to me holding the roses. "Liz, look what you got," she said excitedly, thrusting the flowers into my face. "Someone left these at the front desk. It has your name on it." I quickly snatched them out of her hand and looked for the tag, but the only thing it said was Elizabeth in printed script. Still no sender's name. "Did you see who left them?" I asked desperately. Mary shook her head, shrugging cluelessly. "Didn't see. When I came back from my break, they were just sitting there." "Did anyone see who left?" If they knew where I lived and where I worked, it had to be someone who knew me. But who? I threw a vague glance across the room. It couldn't be any of my coworkers. None of them had ever shown interest in me, and most were already married. Who else could it be? Mary left, and I stared at the roses. A slightly putrid smell wafted from them, like they'd been left in a dark warehouse for a while. I hesitated for only a second before tossing them into the bin. I didn't need this many roses, especially from some stranger. I just wished they would reveal themselves soon. A few days later, I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by someone knocking at my door. I sat up in bed, bleary-eyed and groggy, staring into the darkness of my room. Outside, the pale crescent of the moon silvered the windowsill, shadows creeping along the walls. The apartment had gone silent now, but the echo of the knock still rang in my ears. Was someone at the door? I threw back the covers and climbed out of bed, switching on a lamp as I shuffled past. It was just past midnight, far too late for a visitor, unless it was an emergency. Maybe one of my neighbors needed help. Stifling a yawn, I switched the light on in the hallway and walked up to the door, checking the peephole. The corridor outside was empty. Something strange tugged at my stomach, a little bit of fear mixed with apprehension. Who had been knocking? Had I just dreamt it? But part of me knew that when I opened the door, something would be waiting for me on the mat, just like all those other times. I swallowed, freezing, with my hand on the doorknob. I could wait until morning to check. It was late, and I was working early tomorrow. In the end, I gave in and opened the door. As expected, a bouquet of roses were sitting on the mat outside. This time, the roses were half dead. Some of them were withered and curled, their brown petals breaking off when I picked up the flowers from the floor. There was a sharp tangy smell rising from them, like old soil and roots. And like the last ones, they would be going straight in the bin. Why would they leave me rotting roses? It was starting to creep me out now, since I was still no closer to figuring out who was behind it. I couldn't even tell if the gesture was supposed to be romantic anymore, or something else. I retreated back into the apartment, locking the door and sliding the chain through the latch. The thought of someone visiting my apartment in the middle of the night didn't sit well with me. Maybe I should set up a camera or something. That way I could catch whoever it was in the act and confront them about it. I tossed the roses straight into the trash and went back to bed. Valentine's Day finally rolled around the following Wednesday. I hadn't received a bouquet of roses since that midnight drop-off a few nights ago, and I had hoped that the whole charade was finally at an end. I was wrong. When I got home later that evening, after spending all day burying myself in work, I knew that something was off. The door to my apartment was sitting ajar, shadows bleeding out into the hallway. Fear clenched my gut as I approached the door, breathing shallowly. Had someone broken into my apartment? There was no way I would have left it open like that, even if I had been in a rush that morning. Swallowing back the lump in my throat, I walked up to the door and slowly pushed it open with my fingers. Inside was dark, and it took a second for my eyes to adjust, but I couldn't see anyone. Instincts told me to call the police before I did anything rash, but I didn't want to waste their time if it turned out to be a false alarm. Instead, I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The entire apartment was silent. Nothing stirred. Since I was still close to the door, I switched the light on, letting it flood out into the open kitchen dining area. There was one change that became immediately noticeable to me. The roses I had kept on my sideboard were gone. Instead, a single bouquet sat in the middle of the kitchen table. The petals were a dark, grimy brown color, and the stems were twisted and broken, black thorns sticking out. The flowers were rotten. I took a step closer and almost gagged on the smell. They smelled like something that had been left in the dark for too long. Something putrid and sick. What the hell was going on? Who had left these here? Had they broken into my apartment? That's when I noticed the note sitting beside the flowers. Pinching my nose, I walked over to it and read the black script. I barely read the words when the door behind me slammed shut and something hard hit the back of my neck, sending me to my knees. The rotten roses were the last thing I saw before my mind faded to black. This is what you did to my heart, and it's what I'll do to yours.
I live in a small town in New Mexico. We don't have a lot of things to do here besides go off-roading through the desert or hanging out at our one skate park. Last year, the town next to us got a brand new Costco. It was enormous. At any time of day, there were more people walking around that store than the entire population of my town, and it had everything. The prices weren't too bad either. The problem with a big store like that is how it pushes out its competition, especially in rural areas like mine. Within 6 months of its opening, most of the shops in a 100-mile radius had to close down. Nothing could compete. My little town was all but destroyed. We still had one market, but that was really struggling. Everything else shuttered. So when I got my job at Costco, I kept it a secret from all my neighbors. I worked there 5 days a week, usually the night shift. I figured no one would find out because it was in the next town, and if anyone saw me working there, that meant they were customers themselves, so they wouldn't spill my secret. After a few months, I saved up a lot of money. Plus, none of my neighbors had figured out where I worked. I thought things could go on like this forever, or at least until I had enough saved up to move away. That's when something happened. My pickup truck broke down on the long highway connecting our town with the next town over. I was driving to work at the time, ready to spend all shift unloading a new shipment of beanbag chairs. I tried to call the tow truck, but my phone was dead. I waited on the side of the road until another car stopped next to mine. It was Nadine, one of my neighbors. Nadine hated Costco more than anyone else I knew. She lost her antique store after Costco moved in, and even though Costco definitely didn't sell antiques, she blamed the big store for her loss of customers. I desperately needed Nadine to drive me, but I couldn't tell her that. She'd absolutely flip out. When she offered me a ride, I told her no, but I asked if I could borrow her phone to call a tow truck. She didn't have one. Of course she didn't. So she asked me again if I needed a ride. It was already getting dark, and I seriously didn't want to be alone on the road at night. So I braced myself and told her that I needed a ride to Costco. Her eyes lit up, but not in an angry way. "Wow, that's exactly where I'm going. Hop in." I couldn't believe it. When had she changed her mind? I thought she'd be furious with me. Breathing a sigh of relief, I crawled into her truck and she started driving. We sat in silence for a while. The long road stretched out in front of us until Nadine asked, "So, why are you going to Costco?" "I work there now," I told her. "And you?" She laughed for a second. It was a cold laugh. Then she said, "Check out the back." She was talking about the bed of her truck. I looked behind me and gasped. There were explosives back there. "Are you going to blow up the building?" I asked. She laughed again. "Tell me this is a joke." She didn't say anything. Her truck began to speed up. She was going over 80. If I tried to jump out the door, I'd be splattered against the road. "Please, you can't do this." "You know I have to," she said. "All I gotta do is drive into that building and boom, everything will be better." I begged her to change her mind. She wasn't a killer. She was a good person at heart. She didn't listen. Her mind was made up. I tried to grab at her steering wheel, but she shoved me hard. I fell back against the window. "If you make me crash," she said, "then we'll both explode. You of all people know how dangerous explosives are." She was right. I was raised by a firefighter dad who taught me all about explosives and gun safety and all sorts of survival stuff. That's when I realized that I didn't need to stop Nadine at all. I just needed to defuse those bombs. As she continued speeding down the highway, I slid open the window behind us and crawled into the trunk bed. Nadine didn't bother trying to stop me. She didn't think I'd be able to thwart her plan. There were 3 separate boxes of explosives in the bed, each one shaking horribly from the bumpy road, even though they were duct taped to the truck. It was terrifying to be so close to something that could kill me in less than a second. I reached the first of the 3 explosives and saw a bunch of wires and cords. There wasn't a timer or anything, but it looked like it was set to explode on impact. All I had to do was clip one of the wires. I knew which one too. Unfortunately, I didn't have any scissors. From inside the truck, Nadine started laughing. "You don't have any time. I'll be there in 2 minutes." She was right. We were starting to pass more and more buildings as we got closer to town. I reached my face toward the explosive and bit into the wire. It was the only thing I could think of. The spark shocked my tongue, but I was able to defuse it safely. Thank God. Then I crawled over to the second box. I could feel the truck speeding up. Nadine saw what I'd done and knew that she had to reach Costco before I could defuse the other 2 bombs. The second device looked exactly the same as the first. Once again, I bit into the wire and its digital screen faded to black. It too was diffused. We passed by more cars and streetlights. The Costco building was just ahead. I had less than a minute before she'd drive into the building. I frantically grabbed the third device. This one was placed upside down in its box, meaning I'd have to pick up the whole device and flip it around if I wanted to reach the right wire. I didn't have time. The trunk jumped wildly as Nadine drove over the raised sidewalk and into the Costco parking lot. I ripped the third device out of the box and pulled it to my chest. At the very last second, I bit into the wire and grabbed onto the side of the truck, bracing for impact. My whole body flew into the air as Nadine's truck slammed straight into the side of the building. After that, I blacked out. When I woke up, paramedics were gathered all around me, checking my pulse and shining lights into my eyes. I asked them what happened. A police officer stepped forward and thanked me for defusing all 3 bombs. If I hadn't been there, a lot more people would have died. this whole building would be rubble. How did I survive the crash? I mumbled. He nodded toward the building where Nadine's truck was crushed against the wall, right next to a giant pile of beanbag chairs that were waiting to be brought inside. You landed in the perfect spot, the policeman said. I can't believe how lucky you are. I spent the next few days recovering in the hospital. A bunch of people came to visit, including my boss. She offered me a pretty big bonus because of all the people I'd saved. And as for Nadine, she died on impact, the only casualty that night. My boyfriend James and I were planning to spend the night together. He was always working overtime, so I rarely saw him. This night was supposed to be special. I bought expensive wine and cooked some lasagna, James's favorite. It was 7 o'clock, and I'd just gotten our dinner ready when James's phone rang. He ran into the other room to answer it, and when he walked back in, his expression looked extremely apologetic. He said that there was a crisis at his work and he needed to run back to the office right away. He apologized over and over, and he promised to make it up to me later. I was disappointed and angry. I knew that James had an important job and he was under a lot of pressure, but I was really looking forward to our night together. Still, I could tell how guilty he felt. So when he asked for my permission to leave, I couldn't say no. I told him to do what he had to do, but to hurry back as soon as possible. I ate the lasagna by myself and turned on the radio so that the house wasn't too quiet. About halfway through my dinner for one, I noticed that James had left his briefcase on the kitchen counter. He'd been in such a hurry to get back to the office that he'd left it behind. All his important documents were in there. I called him to tell him about it, but he didn't answer his phone. I was tempted to go deliver the briefcase myself, but I decided that if he really needed it that badly, he'd come back for it. I finished the rest of my lasagna, but I couldn't stop thinking about that briefcase. That thing was like his right arm. He never left it behind. I don't know what came over me, but I walked over and took a closer look. He always kept it locked, so I used his birthday as the combination and clicked it open. What I saw inside made me scream. There were no papers in the briefcase, nothing work-related at all. Instead, there was a homemade bomb with a digital clock counting down to 0. The clock said I had 2 minutes left. Without thinking, I raced out of the house and onto our street. I didn't have time to bring anything with me, not even my phone. Then I looked back toward my house. At first, nothing happened. Then a loud boom echoed through the air, and the entire house exploded. The force of the explosion threw me backwards. I landed hard on my neighbor's lawn. I couldn't believe my eyes as the house we lived in for 6 years collapsed into a fiery pile of rubble. All my neighbors came out of their house to see what had happened. No one seemed to notice me. They were all staring at the wreckage. I felt a hand on my shoulder and looked up. My across-the-street neighbor Dora was standing over me. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. She looked at me for a long time, making sure that I wasn't hurt. Then she asked me what happened. I told her the truth. My husband had left me home alone with a bomb. If I hadn't opened his briefcase, I would have been dead. Dora looked absolutely horrified, but she didn't seem surprised. I knew he was up to something, she said. By then, I could hear fire truck sirens blaring in the distance. I was surprised they were getting here so quickly. Dora grabbed my arm and told me to go with her before anyone saw me. I was too shocked by everything that had just happened to even process what was going on, so I didn't argue. Together, we hurried around to the back of her house where no one could see us from the street. Now just the two of us, Dora explained that she'd caught James talking with some shady people in the park. She eavesdropped on them and found out that he was in business with the mob. She'd wanted to tell me for a long time, but she was worried that he'd come after her. She knew that James was dangerous. But why are we hiding from the firefighters? I asked. Dora peered around the edge of her house. She pointed towards the firefighters and policemen gathered outside my burning house. "Do you recognize any of them?" she asked. I did. All of the policemen and at least 2 of the firefighters were James's friends. If they found out James had committed arson, they'd cover it up for sure. In fact, they probably knew about his plan all along. That's why they were able to get here so early. "So what should I do?" I asked. "Hide with me," she said, "just for the night. We'll wait and see what James does." I didn't have the strength to argue. I barely knew Dora, but I trusted her. Dora took me inside and set up her guest room for me to stay. I fell asleep pretty quickly and didn't wake up until Dora shook me awake in the morning. "You have to see this," she said. Dora opened the window blinds so I could see my burned down house across the street. A reporter was standing in front of the rubble, talking to the camera. James stood next to her, crying. They were too far away for us to hear. "I wish I knew what they were saying," I said. Dora smiled. "You can. They're on live TV." Then she turned on the television and we could hear everything the reporter was saying. She explained that there was an explosion that claimed the life of one person, me. Then she raised the microphone towards James, and I couldn't believe what he said. He said he was heartbroken to lose the love of his life, but that he'd caught me messing with explosives in the basement. He said that I was some kind of eco-terrorist, and that my bomb must have gone off by accident. He openly wept as he said that he regretted not calling the police. I couldn't believe it. Not only did he try to kill me, but now he was blaming me for everything. He looked straight into the camera and said, "Honey, I forgive you." That was the last straw. Dora tried to stop me, but I couldn't hold back my anger. I charged out of there and walked across the fence. With the live camera still rolling, I marched up to my husband and said, "Your plan failed, bitch," and I punched him right in the face. The clip instantly went viral. With all the media attention, James could no longer cover up what he had tried to do. Reporters very quickly discovered his mob ties and the security footage showing him buy the explosives. He was arrested a few days later, and none of his police buddies could help him. His trial hasn't started yet, but I can't wait for him to take the stand. I hope he'll finally confess to everything and explain why he wanted me dead. In the meantime, I'm still staying at Dora's house. It's been wonderful. She's such a great lady, and I never have to stay home alone again.